There we go.
Can't
There
see my
she
head.
is.
My head's chopped off. Let me see if I can
Man,
do a better job. Let me see what I can
let
do here.
let me just stop and say, you are your mother.
I'm
Oh
my
my
mama.
goodness.
The older I get,
Oh my goodness.
that's a good thing. Don't you think
Great
so?
thing. It's a great thing. I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah,
Wow. I mean,
yeah.
from the glasses to the wow. Do, do people say that to you often?
Girl Scott King incarnated.
Yes, you are
Reincarnated,
gorgeous.
should I
People say
say.
you are gorgeous. Yes, you are. Listen, listen. Do people tell you that often? That you look like her?
Yeah, lately, in the last 5 years. Before that, it was like you look like your daddy. But you know, it depends on how I fix my hair. Sometimes if I go up, especially if I go up and show my forehead, I think they see more of my dad.
Well, I'm telling you now. Oh my goodness! If everybody's saying the same thing, they say you're just as beautiful as your mother. Yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
Like,
Thank
wow.
you.
It's just shocking to see because I don't think my sons look like me, right? I don't think that they look like me, and I see people's kids look like them.
Oh
Like
yeah.
Puffy's son looks like him. Like he looks like him. Like he. I
Yes.
have a my cousin G, his son Q looks like him. Like they look like him. You
Yeah.
look like your mother. You look just like your mother. Wow. Everybody keeps saying you look just like your mother. Wow. You tricked us on that one. So for those who don't know, right? Those who are joining us, this is Dr. King, Dr. Bernice King.
Put that A in there. Put that A in there. I tell people put the reason I put the A in, just so you'll
Okay.
know, because my first name, I was named after my maternal grandmother, so my mom's mom. My middle name, I'm after my paternal grandmother, my father's mom. So Bernice is my grandmother on my mother's side. Albertine, my grandmother on my father's side, is Alberta. But because I now use kind of be a king, because I'm trying to send a message to people, and now that Viola Davis has given it greater credibility, because when I was doing Be a King, people were like, you girl, you can't be no king. You can't be no king. I said, well, it's my name, Be a King.
How about
I'm telling
that?
you to be a king and what that represents.
Well,
so not the gender, just what it represents. So be a king. That's why I say put the A in the name.
Well, but and the A, now that is a grown person's name, Albertine.
Don't call me Albertine though.
I would never do that. But it's a grown person's name. Like that is
that's like a 80-year-old name, isn't it?
You got to be named at 40 to get that name. Like you actually got to start with that. You know, baby in a crib that you're talking about. Ooh, Albertine. Like that. What's the short version?
I know. So my nickname, I'm telling the public, you cannot call me this. I will not answer. Was Bunny, like a rabbit. Yeah.
Now, okay. Not
so my dad called me Bunny.
Did he?
Yes, he called me Bunny. I mean, in the formal sense, he would say Bernice, but he called me Bunny. And then when I got to Spelman College is when I started making the transition. A lot of students that, went to Spelman with me, they few of them still call me Bunny because I was transitioning out of Bunny into Bernice.
I got you.
Yes.
Listen, I was Stevie.
Ah.
My family still calls me Stevie, and they will, when they get around company, sometimes they'll call me Steve, or they never call me Dr. Craig because they just wouldn't give me that. But they still call me Stevie, which is fine. And it's weird when I hear them call me. Is it weird when your family calls you Bernice?
No. Mm-mm. I'm so far away from Bunny now.
Really?
It was weird initially when they called me Bernice because I was so used to Bunny. But then I got, and you know what really helped me, especially in the last probably 15 years, I finally looked up the meaning of my name. And I said, I prefer that.
You're right.
Which is
right.
bringer of victory. So I said, yeah, call my name. Because every time you're doing that, you're putting it in the atmosphere. Victory's on its way.
As it is. And so how is it that you find yourself still fighting the fight that you fight, right? Because some people would say at this point, you're fighting for social justice. Yes, you personally.
Well, because it's deep down in my soul. I mean, when my mother passed, I was with her, and people who have been around people when they've passed, a few people have had that experience, may or may not understand this, and most people definitely don't understand it. But the way I kind of explain it is, I literally felt something transfer to me in that room.
Mm.
And you know, when everything was over, because I was, you know, part of helping to put everything together with the service and all, and getting her body back from Mexico, because I no family was there. My brother and sister Yolanda and Dexter live in California because Yolanda's deceased now. Dexter still has a home there. They had to come over to meet me, but it was 2:00 in the morning by the time they got to me, and this was at she died at 8:00 California time, 11:00 Atlanta time. So by the time they got to me, it was about 2:00, you know, West Coast time. And so after everything was over, homegoing, everything, I started grieving and all that kind of stuff. My sister died. It just became real to me that I have a mission to accomplish related to my parents' legacy. It's when I started taking it more seriously. Not that I wasn't already doing some things, but I understood the face of this is gone. It's on me, Martin, at that point, Yolanda. Dexter doesn't do public stuff. And so I said, okay, I got to grow up real fast. And I did not realize, like I said, I look like my mother. I did not realize I started having gestures, intonations like her. It wasn't anything I was trying to do. And started having a similar burden for her and her legacy that she probably had for my father's, in a different kind of way, because I can't compare it. And so I feel like I have, you know, a responsibility, and I welcome it. And I finally, during the pandemic, settled something in my spirit, because people would always ask me, hey, what's your legacy? And I'm like, I can't figure my legacy out, you know, because everything I do has been around my calling into ministry to advance the kingdom of God and to advance the life and legacy of another king that's under the King of Kings. And so I was having this, you know, wrestling going on, and finally realized, wait a minute, most people who are thinking about legacy are not born into legacy. Right. If you understand what I mean.
I certainly do.
I have 3 generations behind me. My great-grandfather was the founder of the Atlanta chapter of the NAACP, A.D. Williams, who was my father's mother's father, who was the second pastor of Ebenezer. And, you know, he did that work. You know,
at a time when doing so could have cost him his life.
Exactly. It's not like today. Setting up a chapter.
It wasn't a not-for-profit organization that he started. No.
It was dangerous to do that. Then he had the nerve to fight for the right to open the first public school, Black public school for African Americans, for Blacks.
I did not know that.
Which was Washington High School, which was the school his grandson, Martin Luther King Jr., granddaughter, great-granddaughter, should I say, and great-grandson, Christine King Ferris, who's an educator and still living, and his other great-grandson, A.D. Williams, attended. So then you go to my grandfather, not his son, not A.D. Williams' son, but my father's father, Martin Luther King Sr., who's my grandfather, obviously. He fought for the equalization of teacher salaries. And he fought for the
among black
integration
between
black and white
people. Right. People need to understand that's what you're saying. Yeah.
Because it's a different day and time. And then he fought for the integration of elevators, because we couldn't go in the same elevators as white people downtown, the courthouses and all that. He fought for that. He got all this stuff accomplished, by the way, at that time. But he also helped to I would say he's one of the founding board members of Citizens Trust Bank, one of the oldest Black banks in our country that I bank at. And so I have all this activism in my blood. And so and then I have, of course, everybody knows my father and my mother. And so I'm like, okay, I was born into a legacy. What I have to do is figure out, what am I supposed to do inside of this legacy? And I finally realized one of the main callings that I have as it relates to that. And it came to me finally last year in January, when the King Center, which I serve as the CEO, the official living memorial to the life, work, and legacy of my father that my mother established 2.5 months after my father's assassination with the help of family and friends. My father said something in his Nobel Peace Prize lecture, which would have been what now, almost 60 years ago. Yeah. This coming year, it'll be 59. He said in the lecture, not when he received the award, this was at the college, the university, he said, I believe that I suggest that the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence immediately become a subject of study and serious experimentation in every field of human conflict, by no means excluding relations between nations. And so this past January, which would have been what? This is 22. This past January, which has been 58 years later,
yeah.
We have launched the first ever online self-paced learning around nonviolence, which we call Nonviolence 365. Most people say Kingian nonviolence. It is Kingian nonviolence, but specifically we have branded it so people will know it's the King Center. And also because I wanted people to understand, my father did not just use it as a tactic, but he embodied it and lived it as a way of life. And so Nonviolence 365 online, which is a 14 to 16-hour self-paced experience, gives people a greater grasp and understanding of nonviolence and can study it in a way that has never been possible around the world, because we have it online now and we have translated it into 6 languages: German, Spanish, French, Italian, Korean, and Mandarin. And we're going to add Portuguese and a couple of others next year. So
what is it that you want people to take from that?
Because to me, until we have a critical mass of people who embrace nonviolence as a way of life, I don't think what we're trying to create in our world will ever come to pass. We won't have a just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world. We'll have pockets of things happening, but it's going to take a critical mass all over the world to understand that there is a way to address these pressing issues. So I see my goal as to do what my mother didn't get an opportunity to do. She started the ball rolling, because she started early on doing the first trainings in nonviolence at the institution. But most people have taken it just in social justice movements. We are getting ready to unveil in January a 3-hour shorter version. This 14 to 16 hour will be a master course for those in the corporate community. So we're getting ready to unveil this into the corporate world. And with the help of EY, they have worked with us on this and helping us to develop this for the last 2 years. So I'm looking forward to that, because we need to see some changes in the workplace. It helps you in your home life. One of our senior instructors and trainer, Captain Charles Alford, used to be with the St. Louis Police Force. He said when he first came to this, because he believed in a lot of violence, he rejected it, and he, was like, I thought nonviolence was about saying we shall overcome and all that kind of stuff. But when he discovered it, it's really an entire way of life. He said it literally saved his marriage.
Let's say that. I'm going to jump in there because I want to jump in there because you bring up a really powerful point. Yesterday, at one of our schools, the one in Harlem, I was talking to our schools, as you may or may not know, the theme of our schools is social justice. It always has been. And one of our scholars, each child has to do a senior social justice project in order to graduate from high school in our schools. And so one young lady was doing something on intimate partner violence. IPV is what they call it now. And what she was talking about was how the grooming process can begin. So now she's a teenager,
right?
And she was talking about the violent way that kids play with one another and how they lower the bar of expectations as to how somebody's supposed to treat them. So to your point, you're taking this notion of nonviolence as it relates to the way in which people deal on a more political perspective, and you're bringing it down to the personal. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, so we define it, yes, as a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that brings personal, cultural, and societal transformation. So in other words, that love-centered way, and of course, what people don't understand is if you get it very young, you grow up eventually. I mean, there's things in all of us as kids. We gonna experiment. That's just real. Let's just be honest.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I really,
it doesn't end at kids. Let's be really honest. It doesn't end at childhood.
No, it doesn't. But if you had some important seeds and you were surrounded by people who believed in this stuff, no matter how far off you get off the course, this is where I believe the Bible verse that says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're older, they will not depart from it. That's what happened to me. And depart from it means ultimately, as you get older, you're going to come back to center.
Another way to look at what you're saying is that if you train a child to speak a certain language, then the child will come learning that language. And the longer they stay in that language, the longer they will live in that language. And it'll be embedded in their consciousness. And so they'll think that way. And so if you do, like so many of our community people do, speak to your children in very violent tones. I'll beat your ass. I'll kill you. I brought you into this world. I'll take you out.
Do that to their kids.
Right. And the kids
and they might literally beat their kid and take them out of the world, unfortunately.
It is a very, 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 very dangerous approach. And what many parents don't recognize, and why I appreciate what you're doing here, what many parents don't recognize is the level of violence that you project onto the children will be engaged in by those children on some level or another, because they will communicate in the language that you teach them. So if you teach your children to speak in aggressive tones, they will speak in aggressive tones. But even more important, they will only hear aggressive tones. And so what that means is that they will only listen to somebody who's hollering at them.
Yeah.
If that person is their intimate partner. So teaching them early on that you don't need to talk to people like this.
And you don't accept that. And the time that you hear it, I'm out.
Right. Like if that's how we talking to each other, I'm good. Thank you. You cute and all, but you ain't that cute.
No.
So how is it that you say that you are uncovering, and I think this is a really powerful statement, just because one would think that you already know what your legacy is. And I think you spent a lot of time in your life managing your father's and mother's legacies, and then your grandparents as well. How is it that you are now finding yourself discovering this? What happened?
Discovering the fact that my legacy is their legacy, and I play a part in this bigger legacy. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
But I don't have a separate legacy. I'm advancing the legacy that I inherited. Because this is the reality. If I focus too much on my legacy, what's going to happen to his legacy? And what he left for us is too important for it not to. And what she left for us, more importantly, which people don't know yet, and there's some exciting things on the horizon related to that, is too critical to the world. And so just as she did with him, and in that process, she developed an enormous legacy out of her own style, personality, etc. The same thing will happen with me, but it's all in line with advancing the King legacy.
Can you talk about growing up in a house of activists? What was that like? Because they're right. there is Dr. King, there's Coretta Scott King. They're the pinnacle,
Mm-hmm.
undisputed champs. But there are many folks in Atlanta, folks in Kentucky, folks in New York or Connecticut, or who are activists, and they're going out to some organizing meeting tonight, right?
Yeah.
Something that matters to them, and they either do or don't have their kids in tow. Talk about the implications of that on the family, just from a child to a parent. What impact does that have?
You know, my mother had to balance all of that. She was the one primarily responsible for us because my father was away a lot. He contributed. But she balanced how much we were out as kids involved in all that, because she wanted us to have a fair chance of growing up and not having to be exposed to all that. But then she also understood we needed enough exposure to understand, you know, what our parents were doing. Now, I was too young because I was only 5 when he was assassinated. So unlike Martin, Yolanda, and a little bit of Dexter, I didn't get an opportunity to do a whole lot. I went to Chicago when he went to expose some of the conditions related to housing there. You know, they did a march, and I was like, when are we going to march? That's what they're telling me. I kept saying, Daddy, when are we going to march? And then when the march came, I was asleep on somebody's shoulders. But I was nonetheless there. You know, we take in stuff in our hearing, you know, and in our sight. We may not know it later on in life. That's where it comes from. But just, you know, once he passed, my mother building the institution, she going out, you know, standing up for various causes, you know, unionization, worker rights. You know, at that time, the gay and lesbian community, gun control, you know, obviously with the King holiday, South Africa and apartheid, it was so much a part of our lives and our homes. And so I often found myself getting involved early as she permitted it. Like I would attend some of my nonviolence training, but as the King Center did stuff, you know, I would participate in it. And then as I got a little bit older into, you know, college, I did more in terms of activism. But she said something real important to me that I think is important for people to understand, because when you try to take on, or when you expose kids too soon, too much to the world of activism, it's a heavy burden for them. You don't know what's going to happen about, you know, because the mental health, I mean, first of all, the mental health of all of us who are descendants of those that were in that movement is always in a challenge. You know, it doesn't mean we're crazy, but we have these challenges because it was very traumatic. We had a lot of loss, a lot of, you know, threats. We in the midst of danger. You know, just growing up in a household, for us in particular, my daddy and mom were threatened all the time, and so you can feel that stuff as children. So you grow up, and in my case, the difficulty was, you know, having to reconcile my parents doing all of this for the world, but what about me over here when I'm going to my soccer game?
And that's really what, and that's, you know, because that right there, right, some of what we're talking about hovers so high above the consciousness of many of us because we didn't grow up a king, right? It just isn't who we were, and period. But you did. So there's that. But in a very pedestrian context, you had a single mother,
right,
who was an activist.
Say that again. Single mother. People forget that. Because I was 5.
Who was an activist. Right.
Next to was 7.
Right. Who had multiple children, who she could have easily said, you know what? Y'all took my husband from me. I'm good. Thank you very much. You go on ahead. I'm going to raise my children. I'm going to go out and do what I got to do. But she didn't. She took it to levels that I mean, who can take on the mantle of their spouse? Just most people marry the opposite of themselves in many ways. So,
exactly.
so to take on what he was doing when that wasn't what she was in, she didn't sign up for that. But in a very practical
But she
sense,
did.
Okay.
But she did. So let me straighten that out. I hope you remember your point. She told people, she over and over again, in the beginning of everything happening, she had to make a decision. Because remember, the house was bombed with her in it, not daddy. He didn't face the real manifestation of a threat first. She did. And so that night, when he came home from the mass meeting after getting the message, he had to check on her, and she was amazingly calm because of the way she was raised and things that happened with her and her father. And she went through a process of saying, you know what? I could lose my life in this as well, but I feel called to this, you know, and I'm willing to put my life on the line and my children's. So I always tell people she made a decision for me before I was born. Like, really? I didn't sign that. I didn't sign up for that. But yeah, so I just wanted to straighten out. She actually said, I didn't marry the man only. I married the mission.
So let's stay there. So to the point, there are many children who didn't sign up for this,
right?
Who tonight, right now here in the Bronx, which is where I am right now, at one of our schools in the Bronx, are going to some community meeting. It's snowing outside here, not in Atlanta.
Yeah.
It's actually icy.
Not yet.
It's right.
That's
it's
not icy yet.
It's icy
stuff.
and snowing here right now. It's icy and snowing here right now. As I give you a weather forecast. Right. And somebody is putting their child on a train with them, getting on a bus with them, and they're going to a community. They're going to an organizing meeting right now. Or they're not bringing their child. The child is home, but they're going to the meeting. Help us to understand what you remember from that experience, and then it flipped over because then you became the parent who had to do the same things because you're an organizer still. Talk to me about how for you.
Help you to understand what part.
What the part for you where you were the child whose parent, whose single mom was out there in the community working hard and missing your soccer games or not being there when you needed her.
Missing all my extracurricular activities. My mother probably attended 2 things out, and I participated in all kinds of sports. You know, I played a few instruments. I don't know if it's because early on for me, she planted some important seeds about service to humanity and the work that they were doing to make the world a better place. And the things she kept saying over and over again that I kind of accepted her going, but wished I could be like the other kids who had their parents at all these different things and didn't have her there. So it was almost like, well, where's your mommy? But people knew, I guess, that she was on a mission. And I grew up with years of internalizing resentment about a lot of this stuff. Angry, obviously. I didn't like sharing my parents because in my case, everybody wanted a part of my mom and dad, almost to the point like, yeah, I know you're the biological child, but I'm a child too. So, you know,
right.
So it's like, where can I have them just for me? You know, and obviously my siblings, but where can I have them? And I remember one time we had a wreath laying ceremony on April 4th. And most years in the early stages, up until probably about 2000 something, my mother would let the SCLC kind of oversee the wreath laying ceremony, whatever program went with, and the King Center would partner, and we would handle holiday. So one year, actually 2 years, I don't know if it was in a row, I got so angry. Why do they have to come up on the crypt? This is our moment. This is my daddy. Why do we have to share it? I mean, the people didn't know. Nobody in SCLC knew that. I've only recently started talking about it.
Yeah.
So I was carrying all this stuff inside of me. But still living my life, and yet a bit of me was like, you know, but my mama's doing some important things. She's doing some important things. And so it helped to balance a little bit so I wouldn't have gone totally crazy.
Right.
Because I was able to say, well, she ain't just out there wasting her time. And she, more importantly, she said, my children are my priority. If I'm anywhere in the world and my children call me, you better get me the phone.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I remember one time when I was a kid, my mother started the King Center in the office in the basement of our home. So one day I went downstairs to want to see her. I don't know what I was trying to share with her, probably something for school, but just being a kid, wanted to be around mama.
Sure.
And one of her main assistants, executive assistants, said, you know, your mommy is busy right now. And so I went back upstairs. I came back down, Dr. Perry, I came back down with these folders because I had watched people go in and out of the office with these folders. And I said, I have something I want to give to my mommy. Can I see her? She said, no, she's too busy. You know, I told on that lady, my mama got on her. She said, my children are my priority. So it's important that the kids at least know that, so that when you're missing, it's not like you're not important to them, but there's something significant happening. And one day you'll understand, you know. So yeah, but she was very good at managing our exposure to things. My first time out publicly, when I say out on a platform, is when my mother had to deliver a speech at the United Nations. I was 17, and she was ill, and she had asked my sister if she would go and deliver the message, the 3-minute message, or my brother Martin. Neither one of them could do it. So her office was on the phone with her. I was sitting at the foot of her bed, and she said, it looks like I'm not going to be able to make it. I'm still not, you know, much better. And I asked Martin and Yolanda, and they can't do it. And I said, I'll do it. Buddy said she'll do it. So she got off the phone and had a long conversation with me and said, you know, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, yeah. I'm a little ambitious child.
Yeah, you were.
I didn't know what I was getting into. But hey, I knew my mother and dad were doing something important, and I knew enough about the United Nations. I said, well, let me, sign on. She said, now, baby, let me say this to you. Once you open this door, it's going to be hard to close. I'll never forget her telling me that. And she was right.
So did we as a community take good enough care of your family after your father's passing?
You did not ask that question.
I did.
You said no dumb question, no disallowed question, no off limits question. Oh, God. You're probably the first person that's ever asked that question. I've never been asked that question. I don't even know how to answer that question other than to say, I don't think so. I think we were kind of left to fend for ourselves. Too many people saw her as a threat, as a woman who was building, I think, one of the first, if not the first institution after an African-American leader. And they told her, you don't have any business building this. You need to stay home and raise your children. But she said, I have purpose. I have a calling. I have something to do. So she was able to rise above it. It hurt, but she was able to rise above it, still love people and do what she did. And we know at the end, she was very honored because of the number of presidents that even came to her service. That will never happen in our lifetime again, because it was from both sides of the aisle. And it was all of them except for Ford, because he was infirm. So she had to do what she did. The fortunate thing is my granddaddy was still here, my father's father, so he was very supportive. She still had her parents, her father and mother. But we were kind of left as the kids. The only person that was very faithful to really showing up and checking on us, checking in, was Ambassador Andrew Young. And that's why probably to this day, I continue to call him Uncle Andy because he was there. Every time when we had tragedy to hit us, because people don't know, they think about daddy. My uncle was found in the swimming pool. No, no water in his lungs, so he didn't drown. We think it was connected to my father's assassination because he was there when my father was assassinated and he knew some things. So we think there was some foul play. I was 6. My grandmother was shot in church. This kind of stuff happens more today, but back then that was unheard of. I was 11. So every time, even though granddaddy was there, Uncle Andy was also there. Then when I had some cousins pass, Uncle Andy was right there. He always was there. He would show up at significant stuff. But yeah, it would have been good to have some folks, you know, come around and try to help you, because I didn't get much help psychologically other than a little bit of time. You know, my mother took us to a psychiatrist, and he said we seemed to be okay. But I think because of her calling, and I'm not blaming her at all. I think she did an incredible job of raising 4 children while helping to raise a nation to keep it, you know, from, you know, imploding violently, because, you know, those riots were taking place, and keeping nonviolence before the nation, you know. And so, you know, we went through that initial phase, but it really wasn't until I got in law school around the age of 23, 24 that I started my first real counseling. So I was just lost in my own little world. And I do think, you know, there's been some, you know, there's in any community, it happens now, in the community of social justice, there are jealousies, insecurities, and all that kind of stuff. And I just wish we managed them better, and not so publicly, because I do think it's damaging to the cause. And because unfortunately, people don't realize something my pastor used to always say to me. His name is Byron Broussard, church here in Atlanta called Greater Rising Star Baptist Church, where I went and served for 10 years, and 7 of those years as an assistant pastor. He used to always say appropriate settings. And I understand it more now than ever before, that there's a time and a place to say certain things, and you got to be conscious. What he was trying to tell me is to be conscious of the audience. I'm very conscious of the fact that out in this world of social media, there are young people that haven't developed fully morally, as you know. They're still developing, you know, the ability to really distinguish truly between what's right and wrong until they're about 25, 26. So the things I'm not getting ready to violate their world that way. And I just hope one day we learn to manage the excitement and the tool of social media, but understand our responsibility too to each other in this world we find ourselves in. So, you know, I know that went away from the question.
No, it didn't go away from, because you're coming back to it. I accept that it's a difficult question to answer, because
it's very difficult to answer because, you know, appropriate settings, and plus there's some things, you know, you always take to the grave. There are other things that there's an appropriate time for that to happen. But, you know, I will say this, the hardest part is realizing that there's more to the story about my father's assassination than what the public has been told or bought into. You know, we as a family know it was not James L. Ray. And so that's the difficult part. And we've learned, I mean, I thank God for a mother who taught us in example, you know, the power of forgiveness and walking in that. And it enables me to love unconditionally everybody. I mean, at one point I did, and I used to hate white people, especially white men. But I'm at a whole different place now. It took some time because it was hurting me. It wasn't hurting them. I was being affected. My body's being affected, walking around like a time bomb, going off on people, and then hurting the people that were close to me. You know, a lot of what's happening now in our world with the violence is these young people are hurting. They're hurting. And there's, like you said, did you all abandon my family? We abandoned our young people. And so now look what they're doing. Violence is the language of the unheard. They are speaking loudly with these guns, this gangbang, all that stuff. They're speaking real loud.
You as a family have had to overcome not just the loss of your father, but the responsibility of taking up his mantle and then ultimately the loss of your mother. But there are some challenges that I see as people who put themselves out there from our own community. How do you reconcile those challenges? The people who, in a real way, could help to ease the burden of the loss and create the opportunities that, quite frankly, they're in a position to do because of the work that your family did. So your family's legacy has made it possible for them to be mayors and senators and business owners and educators and college presidents and the like. They exist. I exist because in the final chapter of your father's final book, Where Do We Go From Here? Community of Chaos, he said that American education doesn't know what to teach or how to teach. He said that a good school, it should be so good that you cannot tell who the child's parents are. He made this possible. I know why I get to do what I get to do. I'm real clear that for that. But even in my clarity, what is it that you say to those people who benefit for generations from the legacy of your family about their responsibility? Now, I know you would never say this to your family, so I'm not going to put that on you, but to those people who have given everything for them to be able to be where they are today.
What would I say to the ones who are the beneficiaries?
Yes.
You know, there are two things. One, we should always pay homage and respect to those who open the door. Because no matter how much people feel that I got here on my own accord, there was some seed sown before you got there so that what you did on your own was even possible. Because your own accord in another season and time would not have gotten you where you are.
Say that, right?
So that's the deception. But the pay homage and respect. One of the most difficult things for me sometimes, I don't need attention because there are many things that happen. I can run straight to cameras and do whatever. I'm just trying to do the work in a quiet way, in a strategic way. And when it's time for me to do that, I do that. But one of the most frustrating things for me is when people are championing about Dr. King, but they have not recognized that doing that is also having the spirit of Dr. King in what they do. And Dr. King was very respectful of his elders, even as he made a different wave during his time where they didn't often agree with some of his decision making. But he respected them nonetheless and recognized that they paved the way. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, the whole, pay it forward notion, but doing it in a way of humility. Because I think there's a lot, sometimes there seems to be a lot of pompousness and arrogance with which the way, we do things. And we're just one step away from something happening that brings us down off of that kind of high horse. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, I think that's what I would say to that group, because one day you're going to want people to say, thank you, you did something for me. So gratefulness is contagious. But if you're not grateful, then what you're giving, pouring your whole whatever into, your time, energy, and effort, if you're not, it's going to all be for naught, because nobody is going to remember you. Nobody is going to celebrate you. Truly, I'm not talking about that false applause, because when people celebrate you is when no matter what happens, they still love you, they still honor you as a person, and they don't just abandon you. You know, they may have to manage some things if you're all out of control, but they still behind the scenes are saying, hey, you know, I love you. I don't agree with that, but I love you.
Well, as you said, you didn't say that Ambassador Young was sliding money coming out to you. Said he came by to check on my family and
me. Did.
And that's what you take with you deep into adulthood.
I do.
And so at the very least,
I honor him for that.
Because it could have been different, right? Dr. King in particular, but your family in general, made a lot of people's lives very good. Very good.
Yeah. My family and a lot of other families together collectively, you know, have, and I say that to people all the time. I am very clear that my father's leadership was possible because of the sacrifices and the support and the undergirding by those that work with him. I'm very clear on that. And I honor them. But I would hope that people at the same course would honor, you know, not just in a holiday, but honor the fact that what Daddy did do is he gave us something that no time can contain because it transcends time. The way of love is the most powerful way when it's activated, when it's understood. And I'm talking about agape, unconditional love. When you live out of that space and place, and when more people in the world live out of that space and place, this is going to be a much better world for our young people, you know, generations to come, and all of us. And some of this oppression and exploitation and evilness that's taking place, it will begin to dissipate, because it's kind of like what Daddy said. One of the tragedies still of human history is that the children of darkness are often more zealous and determined than the children of light. And to me, light and love go together. And so the problem is we have not been persistent enough, consistent enough to ensure that light and love is always present when we're present. Sometimes we let a little bit of hate seep out in our words. Sometimes we let a little darkness seep out in our ways. But we got to combine the two as we go into this so we can break some of this darkness and evil in our world. And we have to be bold enough to do it in the face of all this ugliness. And that was the power of nonviolence. You know, people think it's mandy-pandy and you letting people turn other cheek or whatever.
You ain't shutting down cities. Mandy-pandy don't shut down nations.
Well, let me just say this. It's been studied. Every violent revolution, I won't say every, a lot of violent revolutions, a lot of nonviolent revolutions have been studied. Erica Shinworth, I think Shinworth is her name. It's been studied that the nonviolent movements are more successful and leave greater seeds behind than a violent revolution. One of the main reasons is you're not going to find too many people signing up for a violent revolution. You're not going to find too many soldiers, but you will find soldiers for a nonviolent movement, because the nonviolent movement is not trying to make the other person less violent. They're trying to expose the injustice that's coming out of them. And if that injustice expresses itself in forms of violence, that's what you're trying to expose. And it causes more and more people to join in because they want that stuff up and out, that poison. We need it out. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And we're coming to the top of the hour, and this has been fantastic. First of all, let me take a step back. We all owe your family not just gratitude through thanks, but through action. Your father and your mother and your brothers and sisters, y'all are not asking for hookups. There's a life, there's a legacy that you are now, you continue to extend, and the purpose of it is to take the language of nonviolence as a political experience and imbued each one of us with it, so that it's the way that we talk to one another. It's the way that we engage globally, that we try to find the love, so that it becomes, nonviolence becomes our first language.
Right, and our first thought. So even when we begin to legislate policy, it's the check system is there. Is what I'm about to legislate going to create violence?
Right.
You got, and violence, my mother said violence. She said starving a child is violent. She outlined everything that's violent. We think violence is you hit me, I hit you back, I cuss you out, you cuss me out. It's much broader even than that.
It is. It's a way of thinking. It's one of the things that your family experienced long before and at a greater degree than any of us is you experienced the anonymity or the violence that anonymity can build. When a person can write a note or stick something on a piece of paper or get on this goofy device and get slick with their thumbs, that level of violence is not typical, right? Because a lot of people meet somebody, like when you finally meet them, like, oh, so explain to me what you just said again. That's not what I meant. I'm aware that's not what you meant, but you said it with your thumbs. And you experienced that long before. And now what I hear you doing is pushing hard to make sure that we as a people understand the responsibility of living in a nonviolent space and making sure that we train up our children to live in that same space and pushing each other to be better at being nonviolent.
Yeah. And nonviolent is very revolutionary. You just got to just study the whole thing. I mean, those people showed up with such a, I don't know where it came from. It was a whole nother, it was the Spirit of God in them to be able to stand there, sit there at those lunch counters while people are spitting on them. We ready to take you up out of here. But because somebody spat on them and they took spit for you, germs, for you to sit in any restaurant you want to in this United States of America and sit with anybody you want to in that restaurant cross-culturally and not have anybody come and snatch you up. They got spit on them. Think about that. They got jacked up, but they stood there in a strength. And the powerful thing is, very few of them died physically. They died to themselves, but physically. Try getting guns involved in knives and see how many casualties there will be. When you stand up for nonviolence, the Spirit of God comes upon that situation and covers that situation in a way that you probably should have been dead, John Lewis, but God kept him. So he could be here to be a testimony to this generation of what they did in the 50s and 60s, because God's saying we got to keep moving it forward in the same spirit and in the same tradition. Yeah, you can add all your different, things that you want to add in this generation. Yeah, you can say we're going to be leaderless and all that kind of stuff, but nothing in the universe operates absent a leadership protocol. You can't get anything done without at least a protocol. You can't get anything done unless you even have messaging that's synchronized. Because if you got too many messages, people are confused. Then there's chaos and people do their own thing. Martin Luther King was able to synchronize the messaging that people were able to rally around. It can be 3, 4, 5 people doing that, but you got to be on one accord to do it. You got to let your ego go down and connect with your brother and sister and say, I'm willing to do this as a force together. So if you're worried about whether they're going to snatch one or the other of us, no. Ask me this question. Who is the leader? But there's a protocol. But who is the leader in the community of our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ plus community? They're leaderless, but they got a leadership protocol. Movement under the influence of Martin Luther King Jr. understands that you move forward under strategy, under plan, under intentionality, under coordinating. And I got this close with this thing. This is going to make people mad at me, but I'm okay with it.
I hope so.
In 2000 and how many years ago was that? This is 2022.
22.
So
yeah,
2018.
Mm-hmm.
We had a gubernatorial election. A gentleman by the name of Casey Cagle was lieutenant governor at the time. Brian Kemp was running for governor against him. They ran against each other. Stacey Abrams was running on the Democratic side. She got the nomination. Casey Cagle, who everybody favored on the Republican side. Everybody knew he was going to get it because he was the current lieutenant governor. Lost. Brian Kemp won. People can argue all sorts of reasons why he won and whatever. This is before the actual election occurred between him and Stacey. The next day, in less than 24 hours, I was watching the news and they were showing a rally where the Republicans had gathered together behind Brian Kemp, including the man he defeated, including every Republican leader of the House in Georgia and the Senate, including the state senators that represented us in the United States. All of that leadership, they were right there together. And I said to a friend of mine that night, I said, he's going to win. Stacey was just starting in the equation of running directly against him. Sure. You know why I said that? I said, because the spirit of unity works for good or bad. And whenever we understand the power of unity, it's something about it. I can't explain it. Maybe it was my prophetic gift from time to time that seeps out, but when I saw that, I said, he's going to win. Now, people are going to say, yeah, he won because there was cheating or whatever. That's not my point.
That's not your point at all.
I saw something and the Holy Spirit arrested my attention. And I was like, oh my God. So the guy who was defeated said, let me put that down and join forces. You know, all the Republican leaders, they weren't scratching their heads saying, well, that wasn't my candidate. So let me think for a while. Less than 24 hours later. And so I'm saying that principle, we have to understand when it's time to put all the stuff, the ego, the name recognition, the whatever, because that's what they did in the movement. They recognized that Dr. King had a gift and that he had the power to do something that the others did not have. They also had gifts in other areas. And whenever we respect that, then we can all come in alignment with each other and work together. Because guess what? It was not one leader in that movement. There were several leaders. It's an insult to Andrew Young. It's an insult. And I'm going to speak to the people first in SCLC, to Joe Lowry. It's an insult to Jose Williams. It's an insult to C.T. Vivian to say, to suggest that there was just a leader in the movement. Those men and then the women, the Ella Bakers, the Dorothy Cottons, all those who worked from time to time in SCLC, they understood the role of Martin Luther King Jr. and they understood their role and they were okay with it. And they moved in that stuff and they had great disagreement behind closed doors, you know? But most of us didn't know it until now because they're talking about it. And they tried to divide them, but they still find a way to say, put that aside because we got to coordinate these efforts to do what needs to be done. When John Lewis had conflict with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee around Selma, the march across the bridge, he put that aside. Smith was saying, they didn't want to join with SCLC. It was that youthful battle going on between SCLC, the old heads and the young heads. John Lewis, the young person, put that aside and said, okay, I will march representing John Lewis, and stood side by side with Hosea Williams in the twosome and marched to the foot of that the bridge, Edmund Pettus Bridge. And today, guess what? That young gentleman at that time, John Lewis, his name is much more known. Jose is,